Hello and welcome to today's flow session with me, Helen Beal, the CEO of the Value Stream Management Consortium. And today I'm super excited to be joined by Fred, who is going to introduce himself now. Fred, please let the audience
Yeah,
know.
thanks, Helen. Fred Champlain with ServiceNow. I'm part of our strategic portfolio management business unit, and I work as a SPM evangelist, working with our customers who are doing digital and business transformations, adopting AI, shifting to product models, everything that we think about in terms of value streams. So, Helen, wonderful to be here with you.
Great to have you with us. And today we are talking about the Value Stream Management Taxonomy that I think you kind of created the seed for this idea when you and I first started talking at the start of the year, I think, when you joined the board. So the things we've said we're going to talk about today are what's included in the taxonomy and how people can explore it for application within their organisation or their clients' organisations. We're also going to look at how the taxonomy can connect stakeholders and helps to avoid misunderstandings and therefore facilitate effective communication. And then we're also going to look at how to use the taxonomy as a structured framework for analysing value streams, identifying bottlenecks and pinpointing areas for improvement. So first question for Fred, do you remember the conversation that started the taxonomy off? And do you remember your kind of vision or idea that you thought we should have one?
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. I think, we had a lot of good conversations and I think it's important. It really goes back to the broader perspective of what's the context of a value stream? What are we trying to do with a value stream? And what is the landscape of a value stream? How many, going back to the word of taxonomy and biological and species, how many species of value streams, do we have? And can we have a common understanding? And that's really what matters here is a common understanding. It's not a correctness thing. It's, do we have a shared understanding? And where there are variations and and there always are variations of, let's get a glossary, let's get our terminology so we can have productive conversations. Sometimes I've seen groups talk past one another in different ways. For example, flow, we think, generally that we all understand what flow is. And of course we do in a general sense. Sometimes that gets lost in terms of, well, why do we care about this? And so how do we measure it, and getting into the details and what happens when you have complex ecosystems where there's, we think of a value stream as a nice, clean, chevron pattern and, very linear. In reality, there's certainly some of those and many of those, but then we put those together and all of a sudden we find that we have a complex value stream network. I think of it as we think even larger than that around maybe a value stream fabric, for example. So if I say the word fabric, there's other people that have certainly spoken about value stream fabrics in different contexts. So it goes right to the point of having that taxonomy. What's our common, understanding, just so we can have good, productive conversations.
Value stream fabric. I don't think we've got that on the taxonomy. I thought we could actually have a look at the taxonomy together. I have put it in the chat as well, but
Great.
it is here. So on our website, you get to it under resources. So yes, this starting point for practitioners that Fred was just talking about, this common language to create within an organization to connect us. So we are trying to create kind of insights into the landscape in the context, and this is a big one for Fred actually. It's Fred is one of our biggest proponents of connecting business architecture language with value stream language. So I wonder if you can just go to that point for a moment, Fred, and what you mean by business architecture, what it is as a discipline, who tends to practice it in an organization, and how we connect it to value stream management.
Sure. Yeah, business architecture to many is one of the domains from an enterprise architecture perspective. So you think about application architecture, data architecture, and business architecture. Some other organizations have somewhat of a standalone perspective of business architecture. It may or may not be related to IT. Frequently, we think about enterprise architecture as being an IT driven function. So when we think about business architecture, we're thinking about value streams. We're thinking about that whole ecosystem, though, of what are the business capabilities that are supporting those value streams? What applications, what services, What are the business processes? Going even deeper are what are the interfaces? What does all the technology and the architecture look like that make the value streams, if you will, happen? So those value streams also for operational value streams and not to, we'll talk about value stream terminology a bit maybe, but operational or business value streams are where we think about the customer being an actual customer, typically external, but we can certainly think of internal as well. Has a request of some sort, and we fulfill that request. Customer receives value, a pretty traditional view of a value stream. So we think about what's that customer journey and what are the touch points. So I like to think about value streams as kind of a skeletal system that we need to have value streams. They're certainly fascinating, but probably not to everybody. It's more interesting to think about the customer journeys and the delivery of value, whether they're product oriented or service oriented. But it's the value streams, as we know, as architects, that really matter and give us that organization to kind of hang everything and pull everything together. So that's why you see a big drive in terms of business capability driven planning from more an IT or a product architecture perspective. But ultimately, we're thinking about what are those touch points where we're actually touching the customer, where they're receiving incremental value along those operational value streams.
There's so much in there that we're going to definitely come back to. So value stream types is definitely a thing. And also I wanted to go back to the customer journey and the actual generation or realization of value as well. But before we do that, we do have a question from Chris, which is about, are there thoughts on creating a data model as well as a taxonomy to show relationships? That also seems to be something that's useful. So I don't know, Chris, maybe you can put something in the chat. If you've come across this work that we've been doing, Steve and me in particular with the Value Stream Management Interoperability Technical Committee. This is more of a data model that we've been trying to establish here, primarily because what the purpose of the committee is to create the data broking, if you like, between the various parts. Yeah, so drop us, Chris hasn't seen that before, so drop us a line, me and Steve, sorry, can get you involved with that. I'll just put the link into the chat there as well. And then you just mentioned customer journeys. Can we just rewind for a second? I just wanted to highlight this blog post as well, where we talked about quite a while ago now in a bit of a series that we were doing, which was Is X a value stream? And we looked at things like is release management a value stream, is instant management a value stream, and is a customer journey a value stream? So just rewind for a second, Fred, and go back there and talk to us more about the difference between these two things, but also the similarities and why they're important together.
Sure. When we think about a value stream, I mean, structurally, all value streams have the same structure, if you will, right? We think about value streams as organized by stages. We generally think of them historically as linear events, so left to right for most folks. And we think about delivery incrementally delivered by each stage. So there's really two categories in some, if you will, classic thinking around value streams. And that is there's value streams that interact directly with customers, as I mentioned. So historically, those have been called operational value streams or business value streams. And then there's supporting or enabling value streams. So you can think of maybe an internal back office or a global business service like finance or legal or HR in an enterprise or an agency is providing a value stream that is supporting a company or organization's customers or constituents if you're more of in a government or NGO context. So we're thinking about multiple value streams that are enabling some delivery that's triggered or delivered. It could be internal, it could be external. Now, the important thing to understand is that one person's operational value stream is another organization's potentially supporting or enabling value stream. And so when we're kind of thinking about software and digital products, we also start calling those enabling value streams development value streams because we're doing, software development. And so we've come to call those development value streams. More generally, I think of those as enabling or supporting value streams. So there's different flavors. There's people who have written wonderfully around product value streams. They have certain characteristics. as well, in terms of the dynamic of what a product value stream is, what it involves. And this is really true if you think for in HR, from a hire to retire, we know all of these, from order to cash, right? We know how to refer to some of these operational value streams. So there's a lot there in terms of how there's different terminology or naming around the value streams. And again, having a reference model is why we want to be able to sort some of this out. And ultimately, in most enterprises of any size, we are ultimately looking at a value stream network. Like a good example is engineering. Think about a company that's creating a cyber physical product. It could be your phone. It could be anything that you've got in your office, or like vehicle you're driving in. It could be anything that you're buying off the shelf. There's, of course, typically a manufacturing value stream. There's the ultimate value stream of you placing an order. Many of us have done this on Cyber Monday, of course. And so you get the goods. And you think about all of the work that goes into that, the procurement, the engineering, the manufacturing, the assembly, the shipping, the logistics, all those are supporting value streams. However, if you look at, say, let's use logistics and shipping, if you're a shipping company, well, that's your primary output. That's your primary operational value stream. But in the macro, it's just a part of getting some e-commerce goods or off-the-shelf goods to you as a consumer.
So again, you've kind of gone all the way from customer journeys through different value stream types and then into the value stream network. But I just want to go back a second to you talking about conceptually thinking of value streams as being very linear. And I think certainly when we do things like value stream map, the way that our brains work and the way that that exercise works on a wall, whether that be a physical wall or a mural or Miro wall, is a kind of series from left to right post-it notes or representations of the steps in the value streams, the way that works best for our brains. But I do think it's quite helpful to think of value streams more as a cycle, because they start with an idea and they finish with feedback and are kind of ever kind of revolving around that. This is my slides, my speaker deck, and these are some slides that I've been doing for years actually, but this is quite a recent version of them from the DevOps conference in Copenhagen recently and in Stockholm. And this idea that we can actually build our DevOps tool chain. So if in your terminology, what you were talking about as a development value stream, because it's software development, what we're looking at here is the kind of component parts and the tools where we would get all of that. So I've just got ServiceNow in there, as you can see. So I wanted to give that as an example to people that whilst we think of these as very linear, in reality, they are quite circular. And then moving on to your next point about the fact that actually life is quite complicated. The thing is, we have multiple value streams, as you've said, in organizations and these different types. And we'll look at the taxonomy in a minute for some of the different types we've included in there. But just to reiterate your point that these organizations are made up of different value streams, and different value streams have different components and look slightly different, but there's lots of them and they interconnect. And that's the representation of the orange lines here is very simplified in terms of the interconnections and the dependencies across an organization. I don't think we've put a value stream network in here at the moment. So this is the taxonomy. I've already put the link in there. And hello, Helen from Brazil. Nice to have you with us. Saw that pop up in the chat. Do feel free, by the way, to ask us questions. You've got us live at the moment. So we are here to chat with you. But this is what we've got. So we've got these sections: value stream essentials, flow, realization, identification, types, and organization. You'll have seen at the top that there is the facility for you to add a definition or any comments that you want us to have there. So at the essentials level, we've just defined value, which is obviously quite complicated. We'll probably come back to that discussion in a minute. And then a value stream at the high level, which also can be quite complex as well. I often talk about anything that creates a product or a product or a service is a value stream, but Fred was just talking about a product value stream just now as well. So you can see how complex already these definitions can be. And then here we've got, from the organizational perspective, we've got a value stream network and a value chain, which is a common, increasingly common term as well. What's the difference between the value stream and the value chain is a discussion we come up with, or we bump into quite a lot. But since you've mentioned fabric, Fred, should we have fabric in here? And what's the difference between a value stream network, a value chain, and a value stream fabric?
Yeah, it's interesting. As we think about what are the boundaries, if you will, of a value stream network, and I think this is an emerging area, and just understanding, from organizations, certainly large organizations, you've got partners, you have suppliers, you have contractors, who are all bringing value as well. So, where are the edges or boundaries of a value stream network? Some organizations may think internally as a value stream network, or you may think externally. In terms of a fabric, I'm thinking a little bit more decomposed about a value stream, about the value stream stages, how they're supported, the business processes that are underneath those, or the product capabilities. The thought is that certainly as we move more towards platforms, that a business capability can support multiple value streams. And increasingly, as we think about architecture and the general macro trends from why is cloud so successful in scaling, it's really the decomposition and being able to federate out capabilities. And so we can find that on a platform, we have the efficiencies of a platform, and it really goes also into team topologies as well. For that matter, we can talk about that. And alignment to value and alignment to value streams is really part of the shift towards product, based approaches. But really looking at a value fabric is implying that there's some autonomy in decision making, like you would find in orchestration or choreography of services, of event-driven services, for example. So I think that's where, as we see this evolve and we think about more complexity, that we want to introduce the right amount of complexity in terms of federation, for example. And where does that, fit in terms of organizational boundaries and a value delivery ecosystem, for example. I think, those are the concepts that we need to look at as we move forward. The value stream model, the historic model, I think is very useful, but we know it's much more complex than that. And I think that's where it bogs down a little bit in terms of doing identification of value streams. It's why it's hard to walk in and look at you have to find your value streams, right? We have to discover those value streams, and they're right in front of us, of course. But understanding the relationship sometimes is quite challenging. And then we can map that out, of course, and that provides us the opportunity to improve and optimize and analyze those. But that's the thinking, Helen, around the idea of a fabric conversation of it's more about the architecture of what is architecture in general moving towards in terms of federation as well.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point, which I've literally just forgotten because you got me thinking about the fabric again. So the value stream network, come back to my point will come back to me, I'm sure. The value stream network, we're saying, is the organization seen as a collection of value streams. So the value stream fabric is different from that because it is federated.
Helen, yeah, thinking a little bit more around the componentization of architecture, right? We want components that have multi-use. We have, if you think about microservices, for example, as being the decomposition of APIs, of being very focused functionality. And it really flows with the technologies that we have that enable, for example, event-driven microservices to really understand and where to go next, if you will. So the workflow itself is decomposed, and likewise, the flow of value is being decomposed. So as we think about that in terms of how do we align that flow of value to the actual architecture, and where those touch points are. So you may have, for example, a charging system. In this case, I'm thinking e-commerce, a billing system has multiple uses. And frequently that's the advantage of a platform is you can support multiple actual operational value streams. So how do we start thinking about these interconnected components and thinking about them in a nonlinear way? And then over time, we'll see with AI, I think being enabled and equipped as more of an AI agent environment evolves, that will have a sense of autonomy to some degree within these value stream networks, lending themselves to more of this decomposed, what envision as a value stream fabric.
Yeah, so conceptually, I think the fabric becomes important when we realise that we do have an organisation that is a value stream network, and it's a value stream network because it's made of value streams that interconnect. But the
Hmm.
fabric is like the systems abstracted from the people and the processes. And it's you're saying like there's SAP, and we've got 20 teams that are using SAP, and that's part of the value stream fabric.
Hmm.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's the intersection as well, Helen, a little bit around, where's business architecture evolving as well, relative to technology, stacks that we have today, cloud-based architectures, and how do we really bring those together? So in terms of business architecture, historically we're thinking delivery of value, we're thinking about customers, and this is a little bit more about how do we actually align the delivery of value to the components, to the current architectures. And I think as we continue to see the evolution, certainly around agentic AI, we'll be thinking more about AI to AI, for example. Whereas today we think about Gen AI as really being an efficiency helper, massive value to that alone. But then we start thinking about AI agents and what those look like in a couple of years as they have some degree of autonomy to interoperate, certainly with governance. But we think about what does that next equation look like in terms of value delivery.
Nice. So we've got a few comments coming through that I want to refer to. So there is a conversation. First of all, Oliver, I can see you've got your hand up. I put in the chat if there was a specific question that you had. So perhaps you can let me know. We can unmute you if you want to ask your question. It's just quite frequently I have people put their hands up in these and they don't maybe realise that they have. So when I go to them with the question, it all gets very confusing. So let me know in the chat if you have a specific question. We can unmute you. Dalen has shared his experiences using AI for value stream ID mapping. As we've said, it can be quite hard to identify the value stream. And I think, Fred, you actually started to talk about the use of AI in this afterwards. And actually at Flowtopia, I think the week before last, was it Flowtopia? Fairly recently. We had a live workshop with TechVeris. Dalen, I don't know if you've been using TechVeris, but using a live workshop using some of their tools to generate a value stream map. And instead of doing it the traditional way of sitting in a space, a physical or virtual space with the team and building and visually collaborating on the map, by kind of jumping forward a few steps and creating an example map to get people started. I'm yet to actually try that with a client, and I have to say there's a little part of me that's a little bit like, okay, we're saving some time, but in saving that time, are we actually losing a lot of the value in terms of the visual collaboration to get to that stage to build that map, in terms of the shared understanding of what the business architecture and the business models look like that make up that value stream? So Fred, what do you think about using AI to sort of jump these few steps in the value stream map creation process?
I think that I think there's I've not done it myself. I think there's really good value to doing that as an accelerator, to really facilitate, though, not to lose sight of the what's really happening when you get together to do value stream identification, discovery, and that mapping, ultimately that mapping exercise. I find, typically that's in the context, but not always in the context of some kind of transformation, whether you think about an event of a transformation or journey of a transformation, is usually up front in some kind of transformation context. And I find it really helpful because you're pulling together typically stakeholders, across functional set of stakeholders, also up down in the organization, thinking about executives with some other folks that are maybe even individual contributors or SMEs. It's fairly unique to bring folks together, and I think there's a dynamic there. It really sets the stage for a different view of the organization. And I think if nothing else, when we do the value stream identification type work, there's a lot of value just in creating and bridging some of those silos that are typically in an organization. So I think using an AI tool to accelerate that, and if there's some pre-discovery, that's great. That's fantastic because it can get really bogged down. That's one of the challenges of all of this work, is that you get bogged down. it's very easy, and sometimes you have peel through business process versus what a value stream stage looks like. And so I think there's great value there, but I wouldn't want to lose the context, whether it's online or historically in-person work, to really go through workshops where you can identify work on a wall. It takes that kind of rolling up the sleeves, especially if for an environment, for an organization that hasn't really invested in business architecture. Sometimes I've had in my prior work as advisory consulting is you really find that some organizations already have good business architecture. They've invested in that, and they can almost show up sometimes with their value streams, a list of value streams, and they have a good handle on that. Most organizations are somewhere in between. Some organizations haven't even really thought about that, and it's just tribal knowledge. So sometimes you're pulling together tribal knowledge. And I think the exercise of that as individuals, as people, is really important. But I love the idea. And of course, it's, a good evolution of applying. It's a great use of AI to really maybe shorten that process.
And Gary Rupp, sort of Cecil Rupp, is very well known to us. Welcome, Gary, to the session today. So Gary was speaking at Flowtopia about his new book, The Lean Agile Way, and was at Flowtopia a couple of years ago talking about his book, Driving DevOps with Value Stream Management. So absolutely a kingpin of value stream management knowledge. Also chipping in saying, I think it is a useful concept to define independent and reusable value streams, which makes value stream networks seem more dynamic in nature. And I think that's a really good point. I feel like this whole conversation about value stream networks, we've only been having it at the consortium for the last 12 to 18 months of our sort of nearly 4-year life. It's like we were very focused on the individual value stream for quite a while, and actually helping people understand that this is an organizational level concept, and actually that means it's something that we should be looking at managing the entire organization with, rather than it just being like a tactical thing that we'll do occasionally with the team, is really important. And we do have a specific comment from Robert on the value stream definition that you can see on your screen at the moment. Robert said, why does the definition of value stream not make any reference to a sequence of activities? It refers only to a collection of activities. So this particular definition is from James Martin's Great Transition, which is one of the very early books around value stream management. The definition says a value stream is an end-to-end collection of activities which creates a result for a customer who may be the ultimate customer or an internal user of the value stream. It's the set of actions that add value to a customer from the initial request through the customer's realization of value. And I think my response to Robert would be that it's implicit that is it a sequence. There's the word end to end, and there's the from request to realization as well. And it's a set of actions. And they are mostly sequential, though, of course, we do end up with parallelisms quite often when we look at mapping it out. But Fred, I wondered if you had anything you also wanted to add to that.
Well, I think it's a good question. Of course, I think that it depends on where you're coming from value streams. You mentioned Great Transitions. That's a fantastic book that's, I think, been overlooked. A lot of people would be surprised to read the value stream chapter in that book. It was written in 1995. So there's a whole body of work that started in 1985 with value chains from Porter, competitive analysis. That really there's a body of work out there that predates all of the the discovery or adoption of lean and DevOps and value streams in the context of DevOps, which is the next generation, if you will. Before that, you had manufacturing folks really thinking about lean of process, and a great bodies of work out there. And so when we think about value streams as sequential, in a DevOps context, that's very typical, right? We think about that as sequential and in a cyclic way. We always are thinking about closing our loop, improvement, incremental improvement. Of course, that's the agile pieces coming in as well, of how do we learn, how do we continuously improve. But when we think about, is it sequential or not? Yes, generally there is a flow of value. Of course, there's some flow. It implies that there's some next steps. Is it exactly linear? Well, for an isolated, maybe one particular development value stream and a tool chain and a technology stack, sure, or a particular platform, sure. And when we look at a little bit more organizationally, as we were just talking about, then it's not necessarily linear. It could actually be, a pathway of events through a value stream network or a value stream fabric. So there's definitely linearity. It depends on what level, right? It's a bit of a fractal of are you down looking at a value stream specifically for, a particular value stream, I should say, stage to stage. You look up a little bit, it doesn't look quite the same. So it depends at the level and the fidelity, I think, that we're talking about. And that's another reason to have a taxonomy that facilitates these kind of conversations.
So back to the AI question, and the definition of a value stream. So some of the discussion we just had prompted by Dalen's comments. I think we all understand how AI can be trained with some learned models about what value stream maps might look like and how we can give it some suggestions on what map we might be working with, and it can produce us a map that we can start with and therefore jump those sections carefully without losing any of the value of having those conversations with each other. But Richard's kind of drilled down a little bit further about value stream identification. I think this is a really good discussion to have. AI within value stream identification, can we elaborate on how this happens? So it's like, we get it, right? You get a tool, you ask it, generate me a map, but how can we as an organization, what tool do we use, and how do we say, find me the value streams in my organization? How does it do that, Fred?
So again, I think we can say we're using AI, but what are we using it? What are we looking at? What's the body that's been trained on? And also, what are we consuming as inputs? So you can't just go in and say, I'm going to use AI to find value streams. It's what are the repositories of knowledge in an organization? How are we facilitating that? Is it BPML? Is it BPMN? Is it architectural artifacts? And I think that's where, the importance of modeling, by the way, as we evolve in terms of enterprise architecture in general, especially in business architecture, is modeling plays a really key, because that leads us towards, real-time updates and more of a digital twinning concept that we can, cover, if you like, around digital twinning of a business. Historically, we think about digital twinning of a digital replica or a model that is informed on updated from a physical world, right, with a manufacturing IoT sensors and all of that, but really extending that concept a little bit further into digital twinning. But really back to, I'd be curious to know what the conversation around what are you mining, if you will? What are you using today to get, a value stream identification with high fidelity in a couple hours? And I think that's fantastic. So it's a great use case of why we would use AI. If we can do that, and Helen, as you mentioned, retain some of the benefit of also learning and building, you're planting seeds of transformation when you have those conversations, and you're setting the context for reshaping potentially an organization to be more product oriented typically, but it's some format of a transformation. So I'd love to know more about that, actually, in terms of the approach. But I think that fundamentally you just can't say, hey, I'm using Claude or ChatGPT or whatever your favorite AI is to go out and do that. You need to, of course, have this trained on your internal enterprise or your organization's content. And I think there's, to some degrees, that would vary organization by organization.
And it may have been that thing that I forgot that I wanted to say earlier, but this, one of the thoughts I had earlier that I hadn't expressed was the difficulty of identifying value streams because we're designed as silos. And a lot of the value that we have when we do something like a value stream mapping exercise or any conversation about what our role is and what the value stream looks like often becomes because we're talking to people that we generally don't, because we're normally working in our silos. So I think that's
Mhm.
important to understand as well. And I think what you're saying as well, Fred, is like, how is ChatGPT or Gemini going to know anything about your value streams? It has to understand something about your organization. So, there has to be either, some Jira data, for example, some understanding of backlogs or some portfolio management or something where it can see that there are teams and processes of work. that it can start to look for patterns in.
That I agreed, and also I typically think about this from right to left, actually, as a discovery, right? So where are revenues or where are costs, and so we want to look at how those are aligned in the organization. And typically, we're trying to use those to trace through and understand what's happening today. Because when you're doing identification, you're of course doing it on today's current state. Typically in transformation, then the goal is to take and look at future state options as we want to improve or change or transform. So yeah, it's all of the, what kind of body of work, what are we trying to do, but also, where's our revenues, who are our customers, who are in our deliveries, and looking at that side of it. So starting with a customer and working backwards, if you will, upstream, if you will, in terms of the value stream, I think also is very useful because we can typically find the triggers and we can find the deliveries. It's obviously what's in the middle and what's transpiring in the middle. And how do we find that efficiently? And so I think financials have a lot to do with this as well, paired up with where our investments are today. And then we start finding and can trace out a little bit. And it seems straightforward sometimes, other times it's not. It's a fair amount to kind of go on an exploratory mode to go find this. So I love what people are doing with AI to accelerate that. Very smart, and I would love to know a little bit more around that as well in terms of what is the knowledge sources that they're finding success with.
So I love what you just said about coming from right to left and the role of the customer in all of this. And I know that we've got Roman on the webinar at the moment, and Roman is the senior architect at PeopleCert for ITIL. And it's a conversation that he and I have a lot, and I know he has a lot with the ITIL communities about the co-creation of value with the customer, and that is that, value isn't something that just exists on its own. It is an active product of collaboration. And this kind of also links with a question from Eric, which is, where does service blueprints fit into this taxonomy? Are they between the customer journey and the core value stream? So some thoughts, Fred, on those ideas in the context of what you've been saying.
Well, I think that this is where we get interplay from from a topology perspective as well. It is, there's a lot of data, of course. So the question is, what data are we looking for? What's useful? And in my experience, that varies from organization to organization, enterprise to enterprise. But fundamentally, we're looking for, the flow of financial flow, the product flow, and also how does that relate to the current topology? And that topology may be business units, it may be product lines, it may be supplier relationships, contractor relationships, subsystems. All of this is part of the landscape that we're working through to really understand what is where is the customer benefiting and gaining value, right? Where's that delivery of value? So I think this is why, there's a fair amount of complexity. And we can pick up and get some of the, certainly from business processes, we can look at those. Value streams, as I think of them, are, level 0 or above business processes. My kind of one rule of thumb is if you've got a decision, and that means it's not a value stream stage, or some decision making somewhere in that stage, of course. But the idea being, though, is that as we look at all the different inputs, I think the customer, looking at the customer, working again from right to left, is really critical. And again, it's not just the only way. I think my experience is, depending on the situation, there's a lot to go through. Sometimes people have a really good idea or a reasonable idea of what their value streams actually are. Business folks certainly know what their value streams are because they're managing them. They may just not express them as what we think about as an architecture around value streams.
Absolutely. So we've got a few comments from Daylon. I just want to take them backwards. So Daylon, your most recent comment is that you'd be interested to hear our thoughts on VSM relating to employee well-being. And it seems that most companies have a dichotomy of profit stroke cost reduction versus customer centrism. Recently, he's been pushing more towards Richard Branson's approach, combining employee well-being and them taking care of the employees, and they'll take care of profits and clients. So let me answer this first, and then I'll go back to something else you just said, Dalen, and then we'll pass it back to Fred. So, first of all, when I talk about value stream management, I talk a lot about the realization of value. So this is the customer-centric part. So the customer really receiving value. I talk about this in the context of, or value stream management in the context of us living in a digital economy where to strategically differentiate ourselves, we use our digital platforms. So the reason I make that point is when I do value stream mapping with people, and if I roll back to your comment earlier about your holy grail, you've got B and your holy grail is economic data included in the value stream, which I do because you can do it because you know that you've spent a certain amount of time on a step or waiting for a step. And you actually, when I do value stream mapping, I also work out how many people have been involved so that I can basically put an economic value on it, an average hourly rate, and I can say, completing this work in this value stream cost us X amount. Now, what I've always warned about people, because the hours is obviously very interesting, because what we're trying to do is improve flow. So we want to deliver things to people faster. So if we've got a value stream that takes 18 months, we want that to take 6 or 9 months. And that's what the whole point is. We're trying to take waste out of that value stream to deliver that value to the customer faster. Now, the problem is that when you then say we've got this many hours and then you translate it to a cost, people then go, well, where can I take the cost out of the value stream? And I always have to say that's not what we're trying to do here, because you can't operate the value stream effectively, probably with less people, but you can do it with less hours. So what you're actually doing is injecting more capacity for innovation. And this is in our Value Stream Management Foundation course, I believe. I believe we've got a quote in there from Elon Musk talking, and I know he's not my favourite person at the moment in the world either. He's very divisive right now, but one of the points he's made, I think, is very similar to Richard Branson, but actually from the customer perspective rather than the employee perspective. So the idea around customer centrism, if you've got very happy customers and your business model isn't fundamentally flawed, you're going to be a successful a successful business. Now, we can also look at Gartner's work here around total experience, which connects our employee experience, our developer experience, and our customer experience together, because we are all one ecosystem. So most developers do care very much about the work that they do and what the outcome is of the work that they do. So therefore, they care about customer experience. So if you've got happy customers, you've got happy developers, you've got happy developers, you've got happy customers, it just keeps on circling around. If we understand that our business is made up of value streams, we understand that all of our employees are part of this ecosystem. So, it just keeps on reiterating itself. So I'm going to stop there because I think I made all the points that I wanted to. Fred, what else would you add or what would you change about what I said?
Well, I would just say a little bit further, right? I mean, we're talking about the architecture, the skeletal bits here. We're really not talking about the culture, and of course they're interrelated. They're all one and the same. And I think about it as a flywheel, right? Happy employees leads to happy customers. Some people think the other way around. From my experience is, if you're in an organization that has toxicity, dysfunctionality, you're just going to really struggle. It'll be a lot harder from a competitive perspective to really have happy customers. At the end of the day, you have to have an environments that culturally can enable and equip employees to really work with that change that ultimately we're talking about. How do we improve value streams? And we all know that there's process improvements. There's also changes to organizations and all the things that happen with changing our organizations from a people perspective. Culture, lots around culture, of course. But it's those, the emotions, the transitions at an individual level, all of that matters, right? You can't do any of this successfully in a very positive way unless you're looking at your employees, at your organization, and the health and hygiene. And sorry to use that old word, but I think it still comes into play. So, for example, at ServiceNow, we have something called the People Pact, and a lot of companies have this, right? Are really attentive to what's the health and well-being of employees in a genuine context, right? And how do we think about change, not just as a value stream efficiency move, but how do we actually look at this from organizationally, holistically, how do we drive value to our customers? And it all starts with organizations being successful themselves, which obviously a big part of that is where our employees are at and employee health, if you will, and being able to really work and start that flywheel where we can continuously improve. And that's where we get high performing teams, high performing organizations, because we're fully engaged and we have deep engagement. A lot's been written there, obviously. And you think about Westrum's model, organizational model, as a classic, right? You have your dysfunctional organizations, you have your generative cultures. And that's what we're all striving for. So I think this conversation is not void of recognizing that these are critical, aspects to the equation of value stream management, and all the activities that we're looking at here.
Yeah. So definitely, and Westrum's such a good, obviously, cultural model for people to look at if they haven't looked at it before. Going back to some of Dalen's earlier comments, I want to dwell on your Holy Grail for a few moments, Dalen, as well. So you've got a four-part Holy Grail. So generated AI created value stream validated by clients. I think we've covered that already. Love the idea that we can save some time. Slightly worried about missing out on some of the knowledge sharing gained, particularly by collaborating with people that are typically siloed from one another. B, the economic data cost included in the value stream. I think we just covered that as well, and that it's quite easy to get it out of the value stream based on time, but there's concern about people using that information the wrong way to drive productivity and cost reduction, where they should be looking at injecting capacity and innovation into the value stream. And this is where I would say balance it by looking at a P&L. So understand a value stream is a profit-making entity. So yes, the cost is important, but not just the flow. What's the value realization? So what is it generating? And this kind of goes down into the next few points you make, because the next thing you want to know is like instantly creating multiple hypotheses, futures in optimized VS states with economic impact to org AI generated. And this is what Fred was talking about when he was talking about digital twins. So I've mentioned Flowtopia, I think, a few times now. If you weren't at Flowtopia, it's now all available in the members portal. I've just put a link in there. If you're not currently a member, we have a 50% discount off membership, annual individual membership, available until the end of December. It is coupon code Flowtopia. Hang on a minute, let me type it in. Flowtopia. You'd think I'd be used to typing that, wouldn't you? Flowtopia 50 at checkout. I'll just give you the link as well. So if you check out Glenn Watson from NTT's Data Talk, he's talking about digital twins and some of the work he's been doing with Ambassador Pavel Lazaletsky, who you'll see talking at Flowtopia 2023 about this as well. And he blew my mind, Pavel, at Flowtopia 2023, because he has a vision which is like takes us 10 years out of where we are at the moment, and exactly some of what you're talking. And it's probably closer than I thought it was last year. So let me just grab you that link for membership. It is here. Just copy that and paste that. So that's your third part, I think. And then Dalen, your fourth part, D, auto-generated enabler roadmaps to get you there. So that's your hypothesis, what I call the hypothesis backlog, or the DevOps intervention. So all the activities that we're going to get there. I would add an E, and my E would be about continuous inspection and adaptation, and having a tool that you can use within your cadence of working, whether it's Scrum based and you're doing sprint reviews and retrospectives and planning and stuff like that, but a way of constantly checking how your value stream is improving without having to go through all of this again, which is kind of my reason for being in the value stream management, is because I got frustrated with value stream mapping being something that needed so much work to go back and check. So that's kind of where I got to. So Fred, your view on Dalen's Holy Grail, any adjustments that you would make there or insights?
I think it's a great vision of how to go about this. I think it's, you mentioned DevOps. I think of value streams. I really come to value streams before there was DevOps, right? So I think about this as more broadly, and so this is, we think about the value stream ecosystem or architecture. It's beyond just DevOps. DevOps is a great use of all of this that's evolved, and how we can discover and think about process improvements around our tool chains and CI/CD, and really emanating really from product, and thinking about product management from discovery product and hypothesis driven investment, and the lean startup cycle. All that is great goodness. I see these as all evolutionary patterns, if you will. They're evolving. So I would agree agree, Helen, that putting some feedback in there is critical. And how do we get the concept, that I think about as value telemetry? How do we sense in real time what our value delivery is? And using that telemetry to come back and think about a hypothesis-driven investment. Now, that concept has been brought up more so in development value streams. We've seen it with certainly the lean startup cycle being defined as a pivot, right? Do we pivot? Do we move? Do we embrace? Do we walk away? That's also in general in business, right? Of what do we do, but not commonly practiced. But in reality, there is practices out there that are around scenario planning and looking at that telemetry or that feedback that inform us of which scenario is actually playing out and how do we want to go to change what we're doing today. We have the benefit of development value streams or DevOps being very fast paced because of the technology that we're working with. It enables us to move at a very rapid pace. I think in the business context, some of our challenges, how do we keep the pace going at a business level too? That's the big challenge of the overall business agility equation of how do we remain competitive and continue on a sustained basis to be competitive and have all the product fit and the fitness and the market fit and all of that. So that getting that feedback in there is so critical. And I do think about that as the telemetry, if you will, extending the idea of an application telemetry. We really want to bring that up to where we're actually at those customer touch points. And these pieces are there today. People are doing this. I'm framing it as more generally as value telemetry in the context of we want those feedback loops so we can continuously handle the fact that the world is probabilistic, right? There's nothing specifically deterministic, and we always are adapting, and we have VUCA and volatility and all those things we talk about around business agility. So yeah, adding in the closing of the loop. But I think, Dalen, in terms of what you've put in chat, is a great overview. And where we can use AI to facilitate us, of course, we want to leverage that. Again, I would echo back, Helen, I don't want to lose the human element for that. Maybe down the road, there's at some point where we have systems that are so efficient and agent to agent to agent, and we can do this metadata discovery, and we have it at our fingertips, and there's continuous improvement in a different context. Sure, that's a different landscape, but today where we're at, I think we need to be future forward looking. But we just, our general practices today certainly will evolve those where we can apply AI tooling, we absolutely should.
And Chris has wanted to highlight as well that there is a risk that you pointed this out. There's a risk that people think of value streams as nothing more than a Kanban board. They're a team building and running software, so people need to watch out for that. And then I think Dalen's brought us in a beautiful loop back to the taxonomy. In short, it's how can I present economic impact to value stream optimizations in a language that senior stakeholders understand, i.e. dollars, without agile jargon, such that I can enable faster decisioning. So we have a taxonomy and we have jargon, but we also have language and vocabulary, and we have labels. And labels are really important because they help us understand what each of us is talking about. So I'm working or talking with organizations that are suffering with something that I saw in DevOps, and that DevOps arrived. People started talking loads about DevOps, and then they decided that DevOps was a bit of a dirty word. And I'm seeing the same thing happen with value streams, because people are starting to use it in organizations, using it badly, so using it inappropriately. So they've used it just to talk about a business department, not a specific value stream, for example. I have actually worked with organisations, very large organisations, that have reorganised around value streams, and they've just renamed their departments and their organisation structure value streams. We've seen it with Agile. I've been sat in Poland in client sites where there's been massive drama going on because all of the business analysts have been renamed product owners on a Friday afternoon, and that's just been done with no consideration of what the role really means. So your final few words, Fred, just reiterate for us why a taxonomy is important, why language is important, and how it helps us share value stream management learnings across an organization.
Sure. Yeah, it's for all the reasons that we just have been talking about, right? It just kind of bringing us all the way back to the beginning. And that is, there's complexity here. And so having common terminology and agreeing on those terms, the concepts are in some ways deceivingly simple when you look at a nice, simple chevron-based, stage to stage of a value stream. And that's important to understand, but it's the greater context and the complexity that in real life that you run into. So having some reference point, some agreeability on what's our terms, and they don't all have to be the same across organizations. One organization may decide to interpret, a value chain one way versus a value stream. I have a particular point of view on that, but I think that it's important to at least acknowledge and have a sense of this is a larger conversation. I think again, value streams is kind of a skeletal thing. There's some folks, if we do the analogy to humans and anatomy, there's anatomists that absolutely love skeletons. Orthopedic surgeons and such love to know about skeletons. They need to. But a lot of us really, that's interesting, it's necessary, but we think about the customer journey. We think about what the actual delivery of our products are. So it's a different point of view, but you have to have the value streams. They're there, whether you are aware of them or not. If you're selling, you have customers, of course, you've got a value stream. So it's the degree of how you want to approach this and have that common base of language, and also awareness. So even in this conversation here, some great things I've learned from the chat are awareness. In all of the talks that were this year and last year in Floatopias, I mean, there's a body of knowledge here, and it's really, to give some semblance of structure of how to navigate that. I think that's where a taxonomy has great value for all of us.
Yeah. Perfectly put. Everyone with the customer has got a value stream. So thank you so much, Fred. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I could just put this in the chat, but just to reiterate, this is the last flow session of 2024. So I think all that remains is to wish you happy holidays, and I'll see you next year. Thanks so much, Fred.
Great. Cheers, everyone.
Bye for now.